Okay, I think people joined. Just a short brief intro. I'm Pavel Kravchenko, co-founder of Distribute Lab. We're doing these webinars together with InnoHub, and the purpose of them is to educate people and bring them the best knowledge, about the industry. So we're happy to do that. We talk to very smart people. Honestly, this is my third webinar for a day, and I'm a little bit overwhelmed by that. So I may speak slower than usually. Today's the topic is the Ripple litigation. Ripple is the very well-known company, and I've been connected to some extent to it because I used to work for Stellar, which was founded by the founder of Ripple, who left Ripple, and I know a little bit obviously about the business model, about the struggles. And they raised a lot of money. They sold a lot of tokens for quite substantial sum, and now they have some issues. And that's, again, the Gordon is a securities expert in the US, also a developer, so he can shed some light on what's going on and what I'm expecting to have. We previously discussed the issues with TON, Telegram Open Network. Since our last webinar, actually Pavel Durov, who actually resides in Dubai, had decided to stop the project. So all these issues are connected. I would like to talk about that in a free form. I know, Gordon, you have a presentation. You can briefly introduce yourself for those who don't know you. And let's start.
Sure. By the way, you look good for having done 3 webinars. So
okay.
You probably shouldn't tell people that because they would never guess, but now everyone knows your secret.
Okay.
There you go. Just real short version of what Pavel said. I'm a attorney. I'm based in California in the United States, home of sunshine and coronavirus. I got involved in blockchain, Bitcoin, crypto back in 2014. Thanks to Pavel, actually. So thanks, Pavel. That was actually because of a chance meeting in New York. Speaking of New York, that kind of bubbled over from there. That actually got me involved in Ukraine and Distributed Lab as well. And I, of course, practice law in this area and am honored to be the Chief Legal Officer of Distributed Lab. I also think it's important to educate, talk through, and advocate for this industry. We've got a worthwhile community here. We can accomplish a lot. Sometimes in coordination, sometimes not in coordination with national regulators, but it's just a good group of people. So, I'm not really doing a big formal intro. Again, thanks to Pavel, I've had the opportunity though to speak around the world, now virtually, but prior to coronavirus, physically. So much less flying these days, which is good and bad. And Pavel, if you want, I can kind of set up the Ripple presentation and then
please
go from there. So of course, every ICO offering, whatever you want to call it, from the heyday, call it 2012 to 2017 at the very end, is now under increased scrutiny. We talked about Telegram last time. I have to admit, I'm not some Ripple expert. I kind of put together a presentation and some thoughts on it quickly, just in response to the opportunity to speak to this group. But I think it's interesting, and I look forward to discussing it with the group. So I'm going to go. My presentation is relatively brief. It's kind of some history and context to Ripple. We can use that also to sort of distinguish it from Telegram, and then we'll have a free-flowing conversation. So Pasha, I'm going to share my screen if I can. Let's see if I can do that. Share my screen. Well, give me 1 second here. Let me just do this right. I can close that one. Save. All right, almost there. One more time. There it is. Okay, good. So should see my screen. Paolo, can you just confirm for me?
Yep.
Okay, it says understanding Ripple litigation. So there you go. That's the start page. So, you know, as usual, if the viewers add me on LinkedIn and send me a message, I'm happy to share this presentation with them. It's nothing private and happy to share. So I'm just going to go through this kind of quickly. The Ripple is trying to solve what used to be a pretty significant issue globally, which is the problems facing international payments and transfers. And by that, I also including, you know, settlement, reconciliation, you know, how to conduct financial transactions across borders, especially if you are banks or having to work through banks. And it used to be the case, you know, this is a little bit dated now, and you know, that's worth talking about also. It used to be the case that sending money abroad, like, you know, me sending money to Ukraine or vice versa, had some issues with it. So number one, it would be slow. If you were fantastically lucky, it would take a business day, but in real life, especially if the parties were uncertain, didn't know each other, or is an unusual country, or
unusual country. Okay.
You know, I'm saying that politically correctly, hopefully. You know, it could take 4 or 5 days. It could even be rejected. And if you didn't submit it before a certain cutoff time, it would get pushed over to the next business day, as if the world wasn't rotating. It's not the business day somewhere. So it would take forever, is number one. Number two is banks, credit cards, and PayPal used to charge hefty fees, direct fees. For example, PayPal used to charge, or charges recently, I think it was $7 plus 2.9% of the transmitted amount. Credit cards, of course, have the merchant fees, and banks would charge their additional fees. And then there's sort of what I would call the hidden fee, or the tax, which is when you're going from one currency to another. For example, recently I went from dollars to Swiss francs. The exchange rate that the bank would apply would not be favorable, and that could eat up an additional 3 to 5% of the transaction size. And you know, people, if you're doing this sort of ad hoc or every once in a while, you don't really think about the conversion rates, but it is a real thing. So international bank transfers were traditionally difficult, especially for the underbanked, especially for people working abroad and, you know, sending money home. That's sort of the typical situation, and it's a real thing. So why were bank transfers internationally so bad? Well, there's been a system in place since 1974 called SWIFT, and it says right there, you know, SWIFT is short for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Now, SWIFT is not a value transfer network. It's not a way of sending money back and forth between banks. What SWIFT is it's a messaging platform. It's a standardized platform where the banks, in quotes, internationally, could communicate with each other, talk about who had what balances in their accounts, send money, confirm that the money arrived. It was sort of, I mean, it was actually literally a communications network for banks. And you could say that in a way it was sort of an out of band, or, you know, secondary band or control band way of monitoring, controlling the actual transactions.
It's
so
basically
it's like, go ahead.
It's like a private version of internet. It was built as if somebody sat in their like office and designed an internet. It just, in this always, if just one person does that in a corporate world, it becomes like not very user friendly.
Right, and that's absolutely right. It's sort of a pre-internet. Well, it is a network, but you know, it's not meant to have. It's not intended to be permissionless. It's only, you know, you have to be a bank or financial institution or regulator to get on board there. In fact, part of the geopolitical issue with SWIFT is the United States has been more or less actively trying to get certain countries, for example, Iran, and to a lesser extent Russia, limiting their access to SWIFT. And if you're limited in access to SWIFT, you lose your access to the global financial system. You lose your ability to pay for imports, for example, or get paid for your exports. That's potentially a little bit dangerous, because like everything else I talk about, it can force other parties. You know, it's not like Russia's going to sit back and just accept it. They can come up with their own system. And, you know, between Russia and Iran and China, they have enough economic weight that they can actually get away with this. But putting the geopolitics aside, you're absolutely right. It's a designed in an office communications network for banks, and it had the effect of being a monopoly. You know, if you're not on SWIFT, there's no second best option. If you're a bank, you are in SWIFT or you're in nothing. So the banks, there was no real pressure on banks to make international transfers better. It's kind of the way it was. It's not like any bank provided necessarily better service, and every bank was locked into the same system because of SWIFT. So you can think of Ripple, and this is a little bit of a preview, as being a SWIFT competitor, but not unlike Bitcoin, not in a way that goes around banks, but in a way that banks can use. It's like an alternative to SWIFT for banks. It's not necessarily a consumer solution. So, oops, again, I'm talking about it here. Ripple basically is attempting to replace SWIFT, again, for banks. It's not Gordon or Pavel that's going to be sending money on Ripple necessarily, though we could. And this is ripped right from the Wikipedia page. And you'll notice I highlighted below that it's related to this XRP crypto, which I'm pretty sure that Ripple edited this page because they call it the decentralized native cryptocurrency known as XRP. And I think it's highly questionable that XRP is truly decentralized. Ripple certainly isn't decentralized. This is a little bit of a misnomer, and this, of course, probably as you can anticipate, gets into the securities conversation, because if you don't have decentralization, you have an issuer, and if that thing's a security and you have an issuer, and if unregistered securities are being sold, then you got a problem. So
they have an issuer, and they've been the only one who sold Ripple.
Right. No, and it's we'll get to that in another slide, but you know, they're the only one who sold it, and they're the only one who could have sold it. Mm-hmm. And you know, XRP, the native cryptocurrency for Ripple, is significant. It used to be the third. I think at one time it got to be the second most valuable by market cap. Now it's down to number 4. Shockingly, like Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Satoshi value, following that, but you know, it is what it is. Back in 2018, when everyone was excited, it had a market per XRP price of $3.65, and yesterday is 20 cents. So it's definitely off its high, but it's still worth about $9 billion in total. So it's not a small amount, and it's been high before. So you know, it's right underneath Tether, which is pretty significant when you think about it. So it's a big crypto, and the question is, why would this be so valuable? You know, this is our usual conversation. You know, are people buying this really to transfer value, or are they buying because they think it's going to go up in value? And we'll get into that. Okay, so what is XRP? Well, let's take a step back. Ripple itself is a SWIFT replacement. It's a network. It's the Ripple net, which doesn't technically use blockchain, but it uses a distributed ledger that's consensus-based between permissioned parties to send messages and to certainly send fiat back and forth. It's kind of like what we can call a bridge currency or an intermediate currency that allows fiat to fiat transactions. And here's a little thing that most people don't get. Ripple, the company, is contracted with about 100 financial firms, actually even more. And for those financial firms to transfer value back and forth on the Ripple net, they do not need to use XRP. In fact, they don't use XRP. Those financial institutions are not using the crypto that's associated with this network. It's a weird kind of separation. Now, Paul, if you and I want to send value back and forth on Ripple, we can. The fee for each transaction is, you know, I think that's 1/100,000th of an XRP, something per transaction, you know, plus or minus. And you know, if you think about it, if each XRP is worth 20 cents, that's fantastically cheap. It's much cheaper than sending normal international transfers. But what's interesting about XRP is they have this very early burn model, which is every time you use XRP to transact in money or send funds back and forth, that XRP is burnt. It doesn't go to anyone. So the network nodes on the Ripple network, they're not miners. They're not creating XRP when they validate or when they verify transactions. They are just being paid or earning, if at all, by Ripple. And that's a key idea here. Ripple was one of the first, and this is why it's so controversial. Ripple was one of the first cryptos. It used to call pre-mining the coins, which is rather than the coins getting mined over time, like Bitcoin, which is the key thing that makes it, that and being decentralized is the key thing that makes it not a security. 100 billion XRP were created upon the Ripple network's launch, and they were created immediately. There's no more Ripple to be mined. There's no more XRP to be mined. It will never be mined. There's 100 billion in existence total, period. That's it. Right? So, and Pablo, you were talking about the background of Ripple. It's actually pretty interesting. Ripple's pre-concept was something called Ripple Pay. It was started by this web developer / decentralized expert, Ryan Fugger, I think his name was. And this is back in 2004, 2005. In other words, it was before the Bitcoin white paper. So I have to give Ryan a lot of credit. There's a lot of interesting characters involved in Ripple. Some with good reputation, some with bad reputation, some just are characters. But Ryan, back in 2004, back in 2005, had the concept for an early version of Ripple, an internet-based payment mechanism. Of course, it wasn't necessarily crypto-based because we didn't have Bitcoin, but it was something. It was kind of neat. So he pushed this project, and around 2011, other famous people got involved. I'm not gonna name them all here, but there's Jed McCaleb, I think his name is, from Mt. Gox, who went on to do Stellar. There's David Chaum. There's Chris Larson, who's now involved with Ripple. There's David Schwartz, who's the cryptographer for Ripple, who's a freaking genius. He's great. And Ripple, went through a branding thing where they briefly called OpenCoin, and they had an issue with David Chaum about that. But they've truly launched as Ripple Labs in 2012. And in 2012, when they minted this XRP, and the numbers in this are really interesting. So there's 100 billion XRP minted. 20 billion of that, it sounds like a lot, went to the 3 founders, not counting Ryan. 55 billion went to Ripple Labs. I mean, think about that. That's a huge amount of centralization of ownership of Ripple, or XRP rather. And that brings up the question about whether it's a security or not. Now, some of the founders received a lot of, one thing to keep in mind is in 2012, this is a very small company. So 20% going to the founders, sounds like a big number. 20 billion sounds like a big number, but it's not really excessive if you consider that Ripple was just a very young company, then it wasn't terribly successful yet. Some of those founders gave some Ripple or XRP back, which is interesting. And Ripple Labs itself was under a lot of pressure because of that 55 billion that it had, and people were worried all the time whether or not Ripple was going to dump large chunks of the XRP on the market and suppress the price. So what Ripple did is they took that 55 billion XRP and they put it into a smart contract escrow that is on the XRP ledger. So up to, but no more than 1 billion XRP can be released per month, and not always even 1 billion, which I think is pretty interesting. So let's talk about this escrow for a second. It's actually in a series of escrows. It's the 55% the XRP. It's on the XRP ledger. It's up to, but not necessarily 1 billion per month. The XRP is, now here's a really interesting thing. XRP, when it gets released from the escrow, Ripple decides who it goes to. So it can be for the network validators. It can be for people developing on Ripple. It's not meant to serve their own pockets. It's more like a EOS's VC arm, if you like. But you got to think about it. If Ripple is maybe a security and this money is being released from escrow every month, and Ripple Labs is deciding who it goes to, isn't this a kind of ongoing ICO? Right? I mean, what's stopping them from engaging in this ongoing sale? Who says it's not an ongoing sale of unregistered securities? I mean, I'm glad they put things in escrow. I think that was smart of them, but they kind of opened themselves up to this thing going on and on and on. Okay, so one thing to note also is Coinbase, of course, doesn't like to list securities. It's not a securities exchange. It's very careful, or traditionally was very careful about the crypto it listed, and it did not list Ripple to begin with. In fact, I think part of the deal with Ripple putting its XRP into this escrow was so that part of the negotiation that they could have with Coinbase. And if you look at the left side of the screen of the slide here, it's pretty interesting. Coinbase came up with this Coinbase digital asset framework back in September 2018. And I think they did this partly in coordination with Ripple. And one of the legal and compliance aspects is they need assurances that the asset being listed or being requested to be listed is not a security. So that being said, Coinbase turned around and listed Ripple on February 28th, 2019, which is a pretty strong argument that at the time they thought it wasn't a security. And Coinbase is not necessarily known for taking risks. Now, some of the backstory here is that Coinbase and Ripple and some other parties, I think, formed a crypto something council, tried to get some regulatory clarity from the US regulators about what's security and what's not a security. The regulators declined to provide any kind of useful guidance, which is a shame. And right now, right this moment, Ripple is listed on Coinbase. Yet Ripple is involved in securities litigation. Interesting times. Okay, so Ripple's been faced with a series of class action lawsuits. A class action lawsuit is when you don't have one individual who got cheated or got the bad part of this or that transaction. It's when there's a group or class of parties, usually individuals, who are similarly situated in that they have similar legal issues. So there's been a series of class action lawsuits brought against Ripple on a state and a federal level, claiming an unregistered sale of securities. The main one that most people talk about was filed in November 2018, but there's been other cases merged with that case, and that lawsuit only really started to go ahead, clear its procedural issues in February 2020. So that's pretty recent. It's also worth noting that the ex-CFTC, Commodities and Futures Trading Commissioner head, Gary Gensler, stated his opinion as when he was no longer officially with the CFTC, that the XRP sale was an unregistered or non-compliant security. And it's the usual factors. Ripple, and he actually, it's interesting, he actually compared it with Ethereum, which is what we're talking about, which is XRP, oversaw the development of the network. There wasn't mining going on. Ripple, at least in the beginning, sort of touted the value of XRP as an investment. Ripple maintained the vast majority of XRP holdings. Of course, now it's an escrow. And again, becoming a network validator is by Ripple's approval. It doesn't just happen. So these are elements of centralization that the Telegram network, and especially Ethereum, either didn't have or got rid of quickly. So again, these are the initial stats of Ripple, all these things that made XRP maybe a security at that time. But now it's not entirely clear. I mean, between the escrow and the fact you don't need XRP to transact on this network, and Ripple sort of any sort of control over XRP, maybe it's no longer security. And you can see this in the most recent amendment to the class action lawsuit, where they added 2 new counts of action in March. There's one for false advertising and there's one for unfair competition. And those are not securities related lawsuits. Those are more like bad goods or bad services. And there's an argument that the lawyers that are suing Ripple are sort of hedging and trying to get around securities law. So that is, I'm going to stop. Of course, we're at 29 minutes, but go ahead.
The question is, when we talked about EOS, so essentially what they did is still one party gathered all the money, but they haven't launched the network themselves.
Right.
But who then distributed tokens to investors? The smart contract, essentially.
Right.
So in that case,
very hard to argue in Ripple's case that they didn't launch the network and they didn't distribute their tokens. They almost certainly did. Now what they did is they airdropped a lot of them. Gave them not for compensation, but unlike, you're making a great point. Unlike EOS and unlike, I think, what was intended with the Telegram network, Ripple did launch the network, just like Ethereum launched their network. So they're much closer to being an issuer. In fact, I'd say they are an issuer. The real question is Ripple still a security? Was it a security then, and is it a security now? And I say we don't know yet, but it's interesting.
Okay.
I can tell you did 3 webinars because your brilliant mind is formulating questions.
Okay, please continue then.
Well, that's actually the end of the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions and go back and forth on this as you like.
Ah, okay, so that was the end. Gordon, like, what do you think will happen with all XRPs if it's will be considered a security? They already sold many to banks.
Well, here's a Ripple. Ripple's in an unusual spot. It of course would be a problem if XRP is found to be a security, because no one's going to want to use the tokens. I mean, there's like an implicit sale every time you use them to transact business on the RippleNet if you're paying an XRP. Are you gonna have to pay capital gains? You know, is Coinbase going to have to register as an exchange? It would be pretty bad. But there's a couple things to think about. You do not need to use XRP to transact on RippleNet. You can pay using other methods. You just can pay using XRP if you want to. So it's voluntary. Most of the financial institutions are not using XRP to conduct business on RippleNet. So even if XRP died tomorrow, the Ripple network would still be usable by these financial institutions. It could still be a swift replacement. Ripple's argument is also that even if Ripple Labs went away tomorrow, XRP and the technology that's open source now, I guess, on GitHub, is now available to everyone, and anyone can do anything they want with it. So XRP supposedly can survive Ripple Labs disappearance. Now, I personally, you know, it's beyond my technical skill set. I don't actually know if that's true, but it's a conversation we've had a bunch of times, which is you kind of need a centralized group, at least in the beginning, to launch a network and improve things. Otherwise, things stall out. So even if XRP can survive in the absence of Ripple Labs, you know, is it any good if it's just being what it is forever? So from Ripple's perspective, you know, hopefully this thing's not a security. If it is, they got problems. I'll also point out that the SEC has been strangely quiet about Ripple. You know, the SEC came after Telegram. The SEC, you know, kind of intentionally, clearly exempted Ethereum. And the SEC did what it did with EOS. SEC has done very little with Ripple, and it's kind of strange. They're sitting back. Now, there's an argument that why should they spend resources if other people are bringing the lawsuit for them, like this class action lawsuit? But they're kind of surrendering the initiative or the chance to define the issue. Now, part of this could be because they think it's a hard case to win. Part of it could be that Ripple is actively involving financial institutions in something that's potentially good. You know, the US is very much in control of SWIFT, but we probably want to be in control of whatever comes after SWIFT too.
Yeah. This is a very valid argument. I wouldn't kill the the company if it may bring the results, because
you know, you don't kill the golden egg, you know, the golden goose.
Yeah. It's kind of that many projects position themselves as the infrastructure for banks, and R3 is not an exception. IBM Wire was also actually they based their tech on Stellar.
Yep.
This is
like
really
history. Maybe, you know, I kind of I think it'd be worth bringing to the group your background in it. I'm appreciating more as I get into it. Can you talk about, you know, briefly Stellar?
Yeah, they had different ways to market what they do, and it changed every half a year, in my opinion. And like first they focused on the payment institutions, then to a little bit to securities offerings when ICO started to grasp. Right. Then they back to payments because securities, yeah, obviously, ICOs were kind of became dangerous. And then they talked about the like a backbone infrastructure for a digital bank, which makes sense to a certain extent, but I'm not sure the bank will just outsource all the infrastructure and just rely on certain very young project that's not proven yet, etc. So that was, yeah, a lot of things.
You know, there was an interesting post by, I think it was the SEC technical division or lab. They actually stood up a Ripple node and joined the Ripple network. I think I saw that. I don't see them doing that with Stellar. This is assuming I'm remembering this correctly. I think.
Oh, I think whoever pays more, then yeah, will kind of get these achievements.
Yeah, it's whoever pays more. You know, Ripple is based in the United States, so and it's led by I think Chris Larson. Chris Larson.
It used to be, not anymore. Yeah, the left.
Chris Larson's out.
Yeah. And Stellar they registered as non-profit.
Well, it's a foundation now, right?
Yeah, they also dedicated. This is interesting. Also, interesting question.
I'm sorry. Are you sure that Chris Larson's out of Ripple?
He's not the CEO anymore.
No, I know he's executive chairman. So the guy who is now CEO, it's like Garland or something. So all these class action lawsuits, I can pull it up pretty quickly. All these class action lawsuits are directed against Ripple and the now CEO individually.
Okay.
It's pretty intense. But you're right. I mean, Chris Larson's no longer CEO. It is the new CEO is no. I'm sorry. There you go. It's Bradley Garlinghouse. So there you go. But go ahead, please.
I wanted to ask you like this tricky point when the nonprofit foundation issues tokens, and then they assign certain tokens to the foundation and to the founders, even though it's non-profit.
Yeah, that's rough. So I think EOS had the right idea. I never know what a CEO say EOS. I think they had the right idea in being software publishers and having other people stand up the network. And then maybe the way you do that is you kind of say, when you stand up the network, pretty please include this allocation for the foundation so that we can keep on guiding the software. But that's kind of tough. If you're a private foundation standing up a network and issuing tokens, that's hypothetically okay. There's actually an exception or carve out in US securities law that if a valid nonprofit is issuing securities for its nonprofit purpose and no benefit inures excessively to certain private individuals, then it's okay. It's not a security. It's actually an exempt security, meaning that even though it may technically be a security, they're not going to treat it like one. I think just from a hypothetical point of view, it's a valid thing to stand up a network, issue tokens, and support the development of that software. I mean, there's the Linux Foundation, there's the Ethereum Foundation. It's not normal. It's not unusual, but you zeroed in on the right issue, which is how do you take care of the founders? And it can be legitimate. I mean, these projects wouldn't happen without these geniuses taking the time to do this stuff. And they're not all motivated by money all the time, but they got to live their life, and they have to, have a stipend, and they need to be able to exist after the project. So it's a tricky thing. I think one way to do it maybe is to have a related private entity that's associated to the foundation, and maybe the foundation kind of contracts with that entity, and there's an independent board that reviews it. But there's, that's why lawyers get paid the big dollars, or the big Bitcoin.
And you probably heard this BitClave result that have been forced to return all the money and pay big fine and some things. It was very recent. They raised 25 million. So the SEC is still going on for these ICOs. Yeah,
but if all you have to do is return the money and pay some fines, you did not really have a bad day.
But you already may spend that money, or if it was in crypto fell the prices, and then returning would be an issue.
Of course, life is not easy. Of course you're right, but to the extent that, here's what bothered me about Telegram. In a sense that I'm sympathetic to Telegram. Telegram raised all that money, and there's really almost no evidence that it was misspent. It seems like they entirely spent the money. You know, Telegram itself, the app doesn't make any money. There's no advertisers. They don't, as far as we know, sell that data to anyone else, including governments. And the money that they raised by selling these ton, or the right to get ton later, seems to have been entirely put towards the development of the network. So when they're talking about returning money to the investors, what are they returning? They you know, by definition, it's going to be less than they originally got, unless they put this money in some fantastic investment, which I doubt.
Yeah.
So it's. I mean, do you just kind of take the money and sit there waiting until the government kind of, you know, ignores you long enough? Well, then you look like a scam, or then you look like you're not doing anything. Do you actively try to execute on your project and get something done? Well, then if the SEC decides to be, you know, woke up on the wrong side of bed that morning and go after you, then you got an issue. And you're right. You know, the individuals involved can face a problem. I mean, they can potentially be on the hook for the money that the entity owes. It's kind of the usual theme you and I talk about, which is the system is not designed right now to support innovation and risk taking, even when it would make sense for everyone. You know, like Ripple's innovation and risk taking, it's a good product. It's interesting. Swift should be replaced, or Swift should be upgraded. I don't know if, you know, I'm not anti-Swift. It's just, you know, that was made in 1974. It hasn't really changed since. It's 2020. You know, it's time for Swift to get, you know, 2.0 or 3.0, or for it to be replaced. But how do you do that exactly? You know, it takes a lot of money and a lot of technical expertise and time. Do we have any questions from the group, do you think? Or go ahead.
Let's see, there's something in the chat. No.
Okay.
Like, it feels that we will have more technological projects dedicated to simplify like payments between people or institutions. And like I see them coming, and we're working on them too. And they are not using the internal tokens, or they may use the like public networks to like store some data, to do timestamping, or to like use it as a public depository or something like that. And that kind of that actually makes sense, that because like public network is like a public depository by itself. So it's still a big question how the end infrastructure will look like. And this issue with CBDC, which is also very interesting, because many central banks are still trying to come up with a solution. And it seems like this is like a political like game for the one who will be the first who introduces the like World Bank, not the current World Bank, but just a bank that is acts worldwide, an actual World Bank, where you and me will be able to register online in a second, and then pay each other. And as soon as like this bank will operate in many countries, then essentially what you've said about the like time delays during international transfers will no longer be the issue. Because if we are clients of the same bank, it will be instant transactions and obviously free transactions. And essentially that may happen that somebody like China or US will launch such an institution, and technically you don't need SWIFT anymore, at least for certain people, because like if Libra would,
but I'm glad you brought up Libra. Libra would be what you're talking about, in that it's a. I mean,
yeah, whoever has trust and audience, it could be JP Morgan, it could be the People's Bank of China, or so I would store some yuan. Why not? If it's just opening the application, and now you can store yuan, that would be great, because people know the value of it, and obviously the interchange fees will drive down significantly if everybody can connect to the same infrastructure. So it may happen that we will receive fully centralized system, not whatever Ripple says on the Wikipedia. So the fully centralized system, it just by some reason like trust that institution, everybody will use them. So it's like a joining a game that everybody else plays right now. So it just now the barriers are the registration, the KYC, AML, and so on, like procedures that we can't really select one bank and join it in a second. But we indeed can do this with the messenger. We download them. If we agree, like 10 of us, let's use Signal. In 1 minute, we'll be using Signal. That's very easy. So the same may happen.
Telegram.
Yeah, Telegram. Yeah, it may happen with a bank. Yeah, we just connect and pass the KYC, or maybe some basic levels don't require like KYC, just the phone number, like the messenger, and then we'll choose the best one.
So in preparation for today, I was talking to this Scottish video blogger, pretty well-known guy, and he and I have a lot of different conversations, and I was asking him, like, I know what Americans use for instant pay, use like Venmo and Zelle and PayPal. What do you guys use in Europe? And he threw out similar names, like, there's TransferWise, and I guess the other ones too. And we were going back and forth. There's Alipay, there's WhatsApp. We're close to having platforms for this kind of stuff. Where I think to your point, it's the diversity of the platforms that makes it a little bit rough. And maybe there's a trust issue, and then there's a scale issue. I mean, I don't know if I'm importing lumber, if I can do a letter of credit equivalent over WhatsApp or Alipay for millions of dollars. I mean, maybe I can, but we need to get to the point where that's possible.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that in the world where the single player takes them all, like again, at some moment it was Facebook and Google and Microsoft or Amazon, and the rest are just irrelevant or like niche players, it may happen that instead of trying to build a network, I'm not saying that's good, I'm saying just it may happen. Instead of trying to build a network, the technology could be used by one participant. And that participant, due to some legal advancements of KYC and AML, can serve everybody in the world. And then there is no point to build a network, because like if we all join like JP Morgan, I would say like 50% of population of the world would use JP Morgan. Why not? I mean, it still controls every USD transaction, right? Through their processing. They are the correspondent bank for all USD payments. So why do we need that many banks? I mean, again, I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying that may happen because largely people trust big brands.
Well, let me address that point, because it's a good one. A bank is a bundle. If you want to think object-oriented programming, it's a bundle of characteristics, properties and methods. The people conflate, because it's normal, its depository role with its lending role with its transfer role. Those are actually different methods or functions of this thing we call a bank. The depository concept is, I think to your point, it's a pain that we have different deposits in different banks. It's annoying. We should either have it in our wallets, when the wallets are secure enough, you don't need accounts, or it should be in one centralized ledger, or one that's virtually centralized, so that
of USD dollars, of USD, for example.
Something like that. Now, even if that were all true, the lending function of banks would not necessarily get replaced.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I think that's almost the traditional. It's just the banks would borrow from the central bank, like they do now, actually, and lend it out. Like or alternatively, if everyone kept their money in wallets or in their app, banks would borrow from their apps. I mean, I could actually see that happening. Like it would aggregate millions of apps millions of wallets, millions of Bitcoin wallets, and have smart contract lending agreements between a central aggregator of that wealth who can then efficiently lend out those funds. But let me throw something else at you. I think the world is like it's an anarchical system. No one's in charge. The UN's not in charge. The US is not in charge. China's not in charge. No one's in charge. I certainly no private company is in charge, even though they try to be. I think for some central entity to have a ledger that everyone is okay with using is politically and economically unrealistic at the moment. And I suggest that it really can't be an entity. It needs to be something more like a protocol. Because people may trust a protocol more than they trust Bank of China or JP Morgan. Like people trust TCP IP. So I'm kind of thinking about your book, you have this great financial internet, I think, that I've read. To the extent, like the protocol should come first and take precedence over the institutions, and the institutions should just plug into the protocol such that the specific entity you're dealing with doesn't matter anymore. And I'm not saying that's ideal. I'm saying that's maybe the only practical thing, given the fact we're not going to hand over our lives to Bank of China. Your thoughts?
Yeah, there are many interesting thoughts, and one of them is about like privacy. It's like technically all crypto blockchain projects, they talk about privacy, but we haven't really heard the central bank's opinion. Would they provide?
I hear them making noises about, it's Libra included, I hear them making noises about privacy and safeguards and systems, but I think we all know that legal rules are meant to be broken, not meant to be broken, but they are broken. I was just having this discussion with someone else. If you commit murder, you go to jail. Well, the reason we have laws is because people commit murder. And the fact that we have that law doesn't prevent people from committing murder, because people go to jail for committing murder. So even if these banks or institutions have rules to the effect that privacy will be preserved, and even if there's laws telling them that they have to do that, no one's going to stop that low-level employee from checking out his girlfriend's bank account to see if she's got something else going on. Okay, it's just going to happen. It happens all the time. It's like Ross Wolbrook from Silk Road had that FBI agent or Secret Service agent steal his Bitcoin. So I think we can't get away from having rules. We can't get away from having laws. But I have much more confidence in protocols and systems, especially cryptography, strong cryptography, than I do in humans and systems. But getting the world to accept cryptographically based protocols in lieu of actual banks is tough. I think we gotta kind of flow in from the edges and provide tools that kind of push the world in that direction. It's gonna take a long time, but if I was to endorse your vision, I think it'd be good for humanity if we had one currency, one ledger, one way of doing transfers instantly, one way of verifying someone else's balance. This multitude of systems is a babble. It's like all of us speaking different languages. You need some virtual English for the financial system so that we can all just talk with each other. So, but I'm concerned once we form that centralized power, it will stay centralized, and that's really that's a huge concentration of power, which I think is against the whole decentralized movement. But I also want to be practical about it and get stuff done. So I'm torn.
Okay.
That was my speech. Go ahead.
These are interesting questions. When do you expect this litigation will produce certain results so we can
Ripple?
discuss that? Yeah.
That's a great question. This thing started in 2018, and like I said, it started in November 2018. It finally got some forward momentum in 2020 February. I mean, this is going to go for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. You know, unless they settle or something.
Okay. Okay. And we will talk in 6 years.
Well, hopefully we'll talk before then. We can talk about Ripple in 6 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, I want to congratulate you for continuing to do events during Corona, for virtually being in the UAE, for getting a good group together, for keeping the spirit up. I'm, you know, for handling 3 webinars in a day and 10 calls, you know, and keeping your beard looking fresh. You look great.
Yeah.
So, you know, good job to you. And I want to thank everyone who joined us. And, you know, as always, it's been interesting. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. All right, talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Gordon. Yeah. Bye.